Hey folks, morning. This is Brian with my review of the Runequest role-playing in Glorantha manuscript. So obviously there are typos and things like that in there, which I don't discuss at all because I figure they'll fix those unless it's something that seems to be more than just a typo. This may turn into a weekly kind of thing. I got my Prince of the Apocalypse campaign going again, so I've been doing videos for that. Plus we're playing, and it's tax season, and my wife helps with taxes, and so she's booked up, and so I got to take care of the kids and stuff. So it gets a little more hectic this time of year. And it looks like it turned out that I did miss setting up for Aethercon. I missed that window. I just didn't get down how Roll20 works. So I'll continue to work on that though. That's something I'm interested in. So I'll see if I can't get that figured out. But this session's on magic, a big piece of Glorantha. I briefly discuss the three types: spirit magic, rune magic, and sorcery. They do have a little paragraph though about runes, which I thought was really interesting, talking about how runes are the ultimate source of power, and that each rune was part of the celestial court, and that over time they divided into specialized parts, and from there they created the gods. And that with the coming of chaos, it was chaos that destroyed the celestial court. I thought it was a really interesting paragraph. It would have been nice if they embellished a little bit more on that, in my opinion. They go into magic points. It's a quantity of your life energy. And when your magic points go to 0, you go unconscious, and you regain your magic points naturally, 1/4 every 6 hours, or 1/24 every hour. And talk about resisting spells, that you always have to resist a spell as you are voluntarily receiving that spell. So they talk a little about that because there are times when you may hit. They have a little example there. If you don't tell your other player you're casting a spell on them, and you cast a spell on them, they're going to resist by nature. That's kind of interesting. And again, it's power versus power roll. Which is a little interesting. There was a thing, I believe it was in Runequest 3, where it was magic points versus magic points. So as you cast spells, you became more easily overcome, became less resistant to magic being cast on you, which I didn't buy off on, so I kept with the power versus power anyway. Okay, let's talk a little bit about rune points. And this section on magic is just like an overview because they'll go in depth on each of these types of magic things later because there's whole chapters on each of these. But how you gain a rune point by permanently sacrificing power that you get, and they talk about separate pools of rune points for separate gods. Now I'm actually reading further ahead than this section is, or this a while ago, and I was going to try and put all the magic into one, but it just got way too big. And I'm actually reading to the point where we're talking about rune cults and subcults and associate cults. And of course, an associate cult and a subcult are worshiping different deities, right? But they talk about in those sections, your rune points count for all of them. Or at least what they specifically say is the rune points you sacrifice for those associate and sub-deities can be used for your main deity. So maybe that's the difference. Although that's pretty weak, if you ask me. Because that way if you get two associate deities, you can't use associate deity A magic points or rune points for casting spells for associate deity B. That does make kind of sense, maybe. I don't know. I'll read more later. And I'll get more depth later as well as when we get into actual rune magic. Here's something interesting though. Your rune points are maxed out at your charisma. Where in Runequest 2 and 3, as long as you kept sacrificing power, you kept getting divine magics. There was no limit. I'm not sure how I'm going to play with that. And they talk briefly about you can replenish your rune points by worshiping, and there are other cult activities that help you get rune points back. And they talk much more about that when they talk about the rune stuff, obviously. And then talk about the skill, worship. There's a worship skill. It's a magic skill. And like some of the other skills, you've got a worship, a specific deity. Not all deities, a specific deity, because their worship styles and ceremonies are different. So you have a magic skill for each deity that you worship. And that you can actually use your worship skill to get power gain rolls. They don't go in depth about that here. And they have a whole section on how you can increase your chance to cast magic. You can use meditation, you can use ritual practices, you can augment it with skills such as dance or sing or a magical language, which I really like because I picked up magical language out of the back of some book I had. It was GURPS. No, it was a different type of font that GURPS had. No, it was ICE. It was ICE, Iron Crown Enterprises, one of their supplements that I had. And in the back, talk about magical languages, and they had a whole little list of things. It was pretty cool. So I've got that in my compiled magic binder that I've got somewhere on my bookshelf. And then talk about other appropriate skills. Hopefully they'll talk a little more in depth on that later, but if not, obviously it's the GM decision. Talk a little bit about meditation. One melee round gives you plus 5%, and it increases up to 50 melee rounds where you get your plus 25%, which is the max. Which is different than the way I recall RuneQuest 3 doing their not bonuses, but the way they manipulate magic. 1 is 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 3, but 4 became 6. 5 became 10. It was like an increasing rather than decreasing level of effects. But that had to do with manipulating. You're putting so many magic points that it could increase the duration or to increase the intensity was always pretty much static, but the multi spell, you get one guy with 1, you put 2 and you hit 2. 3 I think was more like 6. So you could get more people effects wise than a linear progression. So this is a decreasing curve. I guess that would be a much easier way to say all that. Rituals. Rituals take over after meditation because rituals start at 1/2 hour. So after a half hour, you get a plus 30. And their table goes all the way to 20 years where you get your plus 100%, which I'm guessing is the max. And obviously, when you're doing a ritual, you're limited. Eating, sleeping, and performing a ritual. Kind of tight, you can't do much else. And it talks about skills. If you're using a skill to augment magic, and you do that skill for 1 melee round, you have to roll that skill at half its percentage. So if you had dance at 60%, and you did it for 1 melee round, you have to make a 30% skill roll to get your augmentation. If you do 2 melee rounds, then you get your normal percentage. If every melee round over that, you get a plus 5%, up to twice your percentage. So if you had dance at 30, say you had dance at 30, and you did 1 melee round, that'd be 50%. 2 melee rounds, that's 30%. 4 melee rounds is 35%. If you did that to 40, 45, 50, 60, 8 rounds, if you dance for 8 rounds, you'd be at 45%, which would be your max. That's an interesting. But then that's for the dance skill to do the augmentation. But they don't really talk about what the effects are. I'm assuming it's the same as they did previously with the rune and passion augmentation. Because they do use that word augmentation, which words mean things, which I'm doing in my Sunday lesson today. Not request, but words mean things. Okay. Oh, also, when you are using a skill to augment your magic, you can't do anything else. No dodging, no attacking, no attacking, that kind of thing, parrying, but specifically no parrying, no dodging, right? So what happens if you hit with damage, you hit and take damage? You have to make a concentration roll, which is your intelligence times 3%. They don't really mention this with the meditation, but if you're doing meditation during combat, I'd apply it. They talk about spells, different verbiage associated with spells, what they mean. Intensity, ritual, spell, total magic points, active and passive spells, enchantments, stackable and non-stackable spells, summoning, variable and non-variable spells. Just really brief descriptions of those things. And they talk briefly about runic association. Runic association only applies to rune and sorcery spells. Now we knew it applied to rune spells because you have to make your runic association. That's the skill you use to roll, right? But we haven't come across sorcery yet, and I haven't even read that far yet, so obviously there's some connection there as well. Talk a bit about boosting. You can put in extra magic points to boost your spell. It won't necessarily affect its effects, but will increase its ability to get through things like dismiss magic and spell shield and that kind of stuff. Talk about range. There's touch and there's range, which later on they talk about more, but they should have just discussed it here. But that's okay. That's because the next section will be on spirit magic, where they get more in depth on that, I guess. Maybe that's why. And we're talking about enchantments. Enchantments are a permanent change in the universe. And that change is provided due to your sacrificing your power. And that the caster of the enchantment has to sacrifice 1 point of power, but you can have that caster can have other folks aiding him or her by sacrificing their power into the enchantment. Which, if you talk about a priest on a high holy day with a congregation full of voluntary people, a few dozen, maybe 100, a couple of 100 points of power into an enchanted item, that would be totally cool. And they talk about binding enchantments. Those are for spirits and other world creatures, and that you need to sacrifice 1 point of power for each characteristic that the spirit or creature has. Now, spirits generally have three stats. They've got intelligence, charisma, and power. Whereas previously it was just intelligence and power. Charisma, personality, that kind of thing. Maybe it does make some sense to me. And it certainly allows the game master much more control over how certain spirits act. It's great. I like that. But in order to do a binding enchantment, you have to have the appropriate control spells. You can bind spirits into animals, and there is a limit. Shoot, sorry guys, I missed something on this. There's a limit on binding of your charisma divided by 3, but I don't recall what that applies to. I believe that applies how many spirits you can have bound to yourself. Charisma divided by 3, because you can add more spirits, or you can bind more spirits. You have to make a charisma roll, standard 5%. But if you fail, that spirit you're trying to bind enters into spirit combat. Yeah, that must be how many spirits you can have bound yourself is your charisma divided by 3. And other types of binding enchantments. No, other types of enchantments. You have magic point enchantments, magic point, well, that's what they're called, power battery, or power batteries. But or spell pattern or something. But you can enchant in Runequest 2. There were specific weren't gems. Well, they were. Should have forgot what they're called. There were these specific gems, drops of the god's blood that had special abilities and properties. And one was to be able to hold points of power, which in this case would be magic points. And some had special effects where they would double the amount of healing you can do, or double the effects of the healing that you do when you cast it through it, that kind of thing. But other enchantments, there's armor point enchantments, spell matrices, and another limit that you can put on enchantments are conditions. It can be an area effect, an attack effect, You can have spells linked or have to have linked spells. They can link magic points to it. For example, you had a spell matrix that cast healing 2, and it had already 1 magic point matrixed into it, so that it only costs you 1 point to do it. You know, that kind of thing. You have a condition for target, only affects trolls. Or on the other side, only affects humans. I ran across. It was an Iron Crown. I was running Moria, and the part I tied it in with the Rod 7 parts. Game of Rod 7 parts. This is kind of a one shot, so it could run through Moria, and they ran into things and stuff like that. And one of the dark trolls in the bottom of the place has got one of the Rod 7 parts. They're trying to get to him and get the other part, and using the rod to guide themselves. Well, along the way, they ran into a party of orcs, and one of them had an axe of human slaying. That was great. Really hurt a couple of party members. They killed up the party, and this axe had a range of 300 feet. So they're holding on to it, right? And it had a special power to do, just I think it was pain, which is like 10% hit points kind of thing. And every so often it would recharge and pain the guy who's carrying it. They ended up tying it to a rope, dragging behind him, 100 feet still within range. He ended up tying 3 ropes together, dragging this thing through the mines. It was hilarious. I love targeting conditions. They're great. And then there's user conditions. Only elves can use this thing, that kind of stuff. Or only, they didn't really talk about it here, but only followers of Shalana Roy. You can do that. You can put that condition onto an item through enchantment. Well, that was spells in general. I've got 2 more sections that I'm working on right now. One that if I get finished this morning, I'll finish up. I'll go ahead and publish today. But that's this next section. Thanks for listening, guys. Hey, if you got any comments, plug them in. If you like what I'm doing, let me know. Appreciate it.